Hey, what is up guys, this is Norman3000. So for today, this is going to be another different type of content and this is my first attempt to review a new game. It has been about 2 days since I finished Emio, the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club. This is such a mouthful, so moving forward, I will just call this game Emio. So I'm still not over this game. You know that Pablo Escobar meme on the swing? That's how I feel. Emio the Smiling Man is the third installment on the Famicom Detective Club franchise, with a whopping 30-year gap between the second and the third installment. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so you don't have to worry. So let's go! For this section, let me digress a bit and tell you my emotional state and bias before I get into my thoughts. I love visual novels. It started way back with the Nintendo DS. My dad had an office mate back then that told him about the R4. He told me about it and honestly I didn't believe him at first until he bought one for me. One of the games pre-installed was Phoenix Wright. And ever since the game showed Frank Sohit as the murderer, I was hooked and never looked back. Over the years, I've finished quite a few visual novels. Of course, I've finished the Famicom remakes from 2021 as well. Since I've finished the game, I've been back reading quite a lot. I typically don't watch Nintendo Directs or watch teasers or trailers to avoid any kinds of spoiler, games or movies. I did not know Emio initially had the backlash. The first teaser was very hyped, and it looked like Nintendo was about to do something horror and M-rated. Then a few days later, it was revealed to be Emio, a visual novel. I get where they are coming from, but at the same time, this is actually one thing I love about the Switch and Nintendo itself. The Switch offers vast genres of games, and it was very cool of Nintendo to throw a bone to a niche audience. Despite reportedly low number of sales for both Famicom remakes, Nintendo greenlit a passion project for Yoshio Yakamoto. I probably butchered that name, but he is also a creator of the Metroid series. And you know what happens when passion projects are made? They are typically great. One example that always comes to mind when I hear passion project, it's Stardew Valley, and we all know how great that game is. And for me, Emio the Smiling Man is easily my favorite game of 2024. So now let's get into the actual review. Visual novels are a niche genre. Either you get it or you don't. So if you're on the latter camp, Emio will not do anything for you. But if you are with the former like me, you will love this game. The visuals are great for me. It has this nostalgic feel. I don't know why, but ever since the first Famicom game remake, I felt this nostalgia with the visuals. Maybe because of the rural setting of the first game, or the fact that the detective agency looks like Kogoro Mori's detective agency from Detective Conan, a series that I recently watched from start to finish, skipping fillers. For the most part, you're just looking at a character on the screen. But there is an ineffable feel with them with the fluid motions of the characters. There are occasional full-screen CGs and animations here and there where it just looks smooth and cool. For all the visual novels I have played, there will be at least one that I will like so much that I will add it to my playlist. Emio is nothing different. The background music always feels in line with what is happening, helped by the fact that this is fully voice acted. Gameplay-wise, this is a visual novel. I do want to point out that, at least for me, there are minor annoyances. First example, there are going to be some scenarios like this. So I need to select an option and press it X number of times. Then select option C 2 times, then select option B, then examine a specific thing, then the next event triggers. There's also the one where I need to type certain words when there's already another feature when you can select any specific keywords. These are minor annoyances, but annoyances nonetheless. I guess visual novels are gonna visual novel. Where the game truly shines is the story. While this is the third game in the Famicom Detective Club series, the story is pretty much self-contained. There are some minor callbacks to the previous 2 games, but you won't really miss anything if you didn't play the first 2. If I may make a suggestion though, if this game interests you, I highly suggest to play the first 2 before jumping into this one, as playing this one might spoil the first 2. So without spoiling anything, the story is about a man with a smiley paper bag that kills people. This is not a spoiler, this is literally what the trailer said and it's on the back of the case. As with every murder mystery out there, you slowly unravel more and more until you reach the truth. I'm not really a storyteller, but I personally felt that the pacing was alright. I did not feel any parts of the story dragging or kind of feeling like a filler. It's a tight murder mystery that will keep you playing to the end. It discusses some themes that are definitely M-rated, and the story really attempts to paint a whole picture covering all sides. In any case, I'm really glad that Nintendo did this. If you are a fan of visual novels, Emio with its great visuals, sound, and a captivating story is definitely worth the buy and worth the time to see who Emio ultimately is. As for me, I'm very glad I pre-ordered this and took a vacation leave to play this masterpiece that I will definitely remember for years to come. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Consider like, sharing, and subscribing if you found this useful. This has been Norman3000. See you soon, and happy gaming!